Well, good afternoon and welcome. In 1990, a group of individuals came together to discuss their shared concerns over the environmental stresses on our bay and its surrounding watersheds. I'm Keith Hagan. I'm president of the St. Andrews Resource Management Association, better known today as St. Andrews Bay Watch, or you could just say Bay Watch and keep it simple. Let me introduce three members of our board who are with us today. Chris, stand up. Chris is our treasurer. Johnny is our vice president, and Ann is part of our board for our communications and several things that I assign her to on a daily basis. So these are volunteers. We're all volunteers to this organization, and we would love to have you all as members and volunteer with us as you can. The original group of individuals coming together with an idea recognized the importance of the bay and its environs to our lifestyle. The system provides us, as you probably well know, with recreational opportunities, clean air, fresh water, food, and has a huge impact on our economy. Bay County is all about the bay. Since 1990, we've taken monthly water sampling from over 72 different sampling locations within this region. The samples are evaluated for turbidity, nutrients, and chlorophyll. We monitor the bay and follow through by growing and transplanting native grasses. We also promote the benefits of natural living shorelines. Let's do away with the hardscapes. Our Grasses and Classes program, that's an easy one to say, teaches our students, both in the high schools and in the colleges, the environmental benefits of the natural shoreline, and we involve them in growing and transplanting these grasses, along with building the oyster shell barriers that we construct and put out for folks. And of course, we put on these series that you're visiting with us today. So we're glad to have you with us today. Carrie's going to introduce our speaker for the day. And by the way, we'd love your membership, and we have a little golf outing here in March. We have some information over here on the table if you'd like to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keith. So we're kind of little transport mic. So welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today. We really appreciate it. So I am Professor Carrie Fioramonte, and I work in the natural sciences here at Gulf Coast State College. Really, all I want to do this afternoon is I would like to introduce to you our presenter today, Mr. Dan Bailey. Dan is the owner and operator of Amavida Coffee Roasters. You may have visited some of their locations in our area. And he would like to tell us all about his journey toward carbon neutrality and becoming a B Corporation, a green business. So come on over here, Dan. We'll get you mic'd up.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming and actually wanting to listen to this conversation about carbon neutrality. And a great space here, and I haven't really been here, so in this sense, it's a great space, perfect day. As Carrie mentioned, I'm really sharing our story, and a little background on Amavida Coffee. We actually formed our company in 2004, and its intentions was to create global impact. We basically wanted to do international development work, and we chose coffee as a way. Pick a poor country, they kind of live in the equator. So we started our journey without necessarily thinking about carbon and these sides, that we definitely had an environmental twist. But that's kind of how our journey started, and we've learned along the way and improved along the way in many different aspects. But one of the first things that we really learned about was organics. I think it was probably 2005. Okay, so we were visiting a farm, and then I was talking to the grower, and I said, I asked him, I said, how has it been since you've been with organics? And he says, well, you hear the birds and you hear the animals around. I said, this is the land where I raise my children, okay? They live here. I don't want them around chemicals, okay? So for me, that became, everything starts with me from a moral perspective, okay? And then I do my research. And so with that said, going to organics, and it was after doing my research, became that moral question that I had to answer. And then we became certified organic not much later. So fast forward, I think I heard about carbon neutrality. It's probably Al Gore, probably 2006 or something. Everybody remembers the charts, And so I think, like me, like a lot of other people, never really paid much attention to it, But fast forward, probably about 5 years ago, our growers, all over, really mostly Central America, South America, were experiencing really a severe disease with all their plants. They're losing about close to 50% of all their crops. And the disease was called Aroya. So, and it basically, if you listen to him again and you say, well, what's really causing this? He says, well, it's climate change. It's the rain is coming much harder, okay, in shorter periods of time, and it's really causing this humidity under our plants, which is causing the fungus, and then it's killing all their trees. So there, once again, moral question. Okay, how do we solve this? Now we're in a reactive mode, trying to really work with producers around the world, and a whole collective of people, not just us, but obviously a lot of people throwing everything at it. So carbon neutrality, that's kind of where my journey started, and I'll see if this is going to work. Yeah, it did. For me, it starts with the moral side first, and then we had to do our research. So when we look at it, the people in the developing countries, kind of through that story, they're really having to adapt. Okay, they're on the front line. Okay, and you can see most of the northern countries are really producing most of the carbon pollution around the world. But particularly the poor countries, they're having to deal with adaptation to that and building resiliency projects that allow them to either maintain their forest land, their form of economy. These same communities have the largest biosphere in the world. They produce the most carbon in there. Okay. When you start tearing down Amazon forests, or you start doing all of these communities where the vast majority of our carbon is produced, So there's a direct connection between all these as well. The other thing I learned was it's not solvable by one person. Individuals certainly can play a role. Businesses certainly can play a role. Academia certainly plays in a role in terms of education, also educating businesses on how to do things differently, And of course, government is a component, or not just locally in the United States, but internationally, So, and we'll talk a little bit further about what's going around in the world, okay? So it's really, the fact that we're here today, you're probably seeing a little bit. We have individuals, we have academia, you have business owners, maybe somebody here from government as well, okay? But collectively, this is the way we're going to end up solving this, okay? I'll just do a Carbon 101 real quick, because I'm probably like the average person on the street. I left that farm, didn't really understand it, okay? So what is it, okay? So, we have everyone's heard of greenhouse gases. We've also heard they're called carbon emissions. It occurs naturally in the atmosphere. We breathe carbon, okay? It increases with human activities such as fossil fuel or deforestation are some of the biggest causes. Obviously, transportation is a big piece of it. The way we use the lands in terms of livestock and so on has a lot to do with those two are some really big components. And certainly industry is a very huge component of it, what they produce and make. It's basically warming the earth, okay? It's trapping the heat, and it's increasing the temperature of the surface. Got an Al Gore slide coming up here, okay? Not this one. So the way we measure it is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, it's measured in metric tons, 2,200 pounds. It's also, they combine different gases into one equivalent unit. And what I mean by that, carbon is one, for example, but if you pick down over here methane, it's basically 25 times equivalent of one carbon. So different emissions are occurring around the world, and they really convert that to an equivalent ton, okay, measurement. So that's the unit that we are really use as a foundation to measure what are we producing, what as individuals or as a company, So little fact there. So a little bit of see what's going on in the world. You can see really from 2010 all the way to where we are at 2018. This is gigatons. I didn't know what a gigaton is. It's a billion tons. Okay, it's hard to imagine that. Okay, you know, even that number, what it is, it's hard to picture in our mind, and for at least it is for me. But what I can see is that curve. Okay, and I can correlate that with surface temperatures changing, and then I can read the paper and the news and follow what's going on around the world. Okay, enough that my question about the moral value is answered. Okay, particularly when I listen to my growers. Okay, because ultimately we got to listen to them. They're the ones that are impacted, having to adapt. So if you, the 2019 view, it's United States and, well, who was the other one? I think it showed a decline. European nations and United States showed a decline, which is really good. Actually, U.S. is, most people really, sometimes we don't know how well we're doing. United States reduced its emissions from 2005 through 2017 by about 15%, okay? A lot of that is occurring that just by changes in vehicles that are getting better gas mileages. If you replace your AC system, you're getting higher quality unit in your systems, all right? So just a lot of that is occurring. Solar power is increasing. Alternate energy sources are also increasing. So we're naturally doing it. Our challenge is we moved a lot of our manufacturing over to China, who's got the bigger numbers, okay? So, or India, or certainly Asia. So in many ways, we are shifting some of those things over. On the same token, they're working on that as well. So and just to give you a picture, average tons per capita here, you see where we are as the United States. We're at 16.9 tons. We are, as individuals per capita, what we use, we are large consumers, all right? You know, if there's anybody that really needs to make adjustments in our lifestyle, we really should be looking close at us as America, the way we, our consumption, the way we consume. Europeans are a little more pragmatic, and you can, but you can see the Chinese is really just do their manufacturing growth. It's occurring over there. What else? Any on there? Average temperature variation, it's really gone up about 1 degree since 1980. It doesn't seem like that, but that 1 degree impact is huge to what it's doing. You know, how do you, can you quantify everything that's going on in the world that I can see? Are we getting more hurricanes? Actually, I don't know that we are. I'm sure this weather meteorologist could tell me, but they're certainly getting more intense. That's one thing we're seeing, the intensity level, and that has a lot to do with the surface temperatures that are occurring. The water, our whole water system and the land, they are carbon sinks. They actually help address the temperatures. They actually help reduce the temperatures on the air. But it's obviously a problematic, keeps growing, and so that's a little bit about the variation. Let's talk about a carbon credit, okay. A lot of what's going on in the United States and around the world is, if we look at, we emit carbons as individuals, as businesses, and so on, but we can also offset them, okay? Oftentimes, they're doing it through planting trees, okay, the right kind of trees, okay, in other areas. So trees are actually carbon sinks. They're actually absorbing carbon. So this is a real key word because this is being used a lot as part of the solutions, okay, that are coming up, okay. So for example, Amavida, we talk about carbon neutrality. We measured what we were producing. It's 187 tons of carbon as a company. And then we said, okay, now we're done. We replaced all the light bulbs, the LEDs. Okay, we've done as much as we can from an efficiency point of view. And then we say, all right, we got this other leftover carbon here. How can I offset that? So in our case, we buy carbon offsets in Nicaragua. It's under a program that does land management. So think of the idea as you have the farms produce trees, okay, as part of their crop. They're actually dependent on as an income. They also have some that are just natural forests, and then they have unproductive land, okay. So if we invest in that unproductive land, we're actually planting more trees of the right kind, okay? Particularly trees that absorb carbon better than, say, pine, for example. Pine is not a real good carbon sink, okay? Some of your hardwoods are much better at it. So it also creates an alternate economy for them. Once again, they're the ones that are adapting, okay? So this is being used, and it doesn't absolve us from not taking corrective action. So one of the things we've learned as a company, you really have to understand what you're doing, and then you can correct what you can correct, okay? I have a 6-cylinder F-160 pickup truck, okay? But it's always full of stuff, okay? I even haul recycled cardboard with it, okay? And yeah, it does keep me awake at night a little bit, okay? But there's certain things that we can't do that as a business, if you need that tool or that thing, but you still should learn, and then learn how you can adjust on that. And that's kind of our journey, because we've done that. There's a lot going on that you turn on the news, you can really get misinformed. But there's a lot going on in the world, okay? I would also tell you we're at the beginnings of it. If you look really, actually back in 1997, they had Kyoto Treaty that was launched so they've been working on carbon neutrality a long time, even at a broader global level. It just hasn't hit the mainstream. Now we're hearing about like the Kyoto Agreement, which is where countries are trying to become carbon neutral by 2050. Most of us know America didn't sign that treaty. The United States didn't. But they launched, the other thing that occurred is the UN launched Carbon Neutral Now. They start that. That'll actually replace the protocol to Kyoto. But basically, 187 countries agreed to reduce their carbon emission by 2050, okay? So there's a lot going on. And U.S. is not on it, but we have a lot of other things going on, So if you look at United States, these are some of the bigger things that are occurring. We have Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. This is where these groups of cities, there's 9 cities here, that they're going to reduce their carbon pollution by 80% by 2030. And you have a similar thing going on, 9 states up in the eastern one. And then you have Net Zero, which is really driven by benefit corporations. And we're right now, I think we're at this point, we're about 600 businesses that have agreed to be carbon neutral by 2030. Amavida is a B corporation, a benefit corporation. I'll tell you a little bit what that is, okay? So in simple terms, if you said you're a good business, says who, okay? Prior to B Corporation, there was no criteria or no one to say this is a list of good practices as a business, if you followed, that you could be recognized as a good business, okay? So B corporations launched probably about 10 years ago. They were founded by names you'll know, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Etsy. There's a whole bunch of other. These groups got together and said, the way we're doing business in the world really needs a shift. So they're really the catalyst of shift, And so they said, okay, let's develop what a criteria is for business. So with that process, they created a marketing side for B corporations. They also created a certification side, the same called blabs.net. They house the best practices and the assessment that you go through to be a benefit corporation. And then they worked on a legal structure. So now you can be a legal benefit corporation in 38 states. No, I'm sorry, 38 states. All right, so what do we mean by the legal structure? Most businesses today, if you're certainly publicly traded, you have a responsibility to your shareholders. Okay, and most of those decisions always benefit the shareholder. It's a legal responsibility, But somewhere along that process, they forgot about the other shareholders. Okay, so the environment, the community, your employees, and then your governance and the way you run your company. All right. So that is part of the criteria of being a B corporation. Its foundation is not being the best, it's about being the best for all of those tenets that I just described, okay? The last one are these guys right here, is academia, all right? So if you believe that business, the foundations of business that we were taught, that doesn't matter where you went to school, came from Harvard or Wharton, pretty much, in the United States, okay? The foundations of shareholder-based business came from there. So that's, it's been out there 30-something years, that same framework. So academia right now is working, many universities across Florida, certainly across the country, is working on changing the way they're teaching business, okay? So that it's in line with these philosophies, okay? From my point of view, it's super important because it's going to be a moral shift in the way we conduct business with respect to the environment, your community, employees, okay, and your governance, okay? So this group all have agreed to be carbon neutral by 2030, okay? So there's a business shift on there, okay? So a little bit about those guys. Another word that comes up a lot is cap and trade. You will hear this mostly being evaluated in California. California is modeling this right now. It's definitely not a perfect system, okay? It's basically monetizing carbon, okay? You know, and it's throwing it out in the free market to work with. It's under the regulatory system in California, they're saying, I'm going to give you a cap that you're going to produce, okay, and then you can buy offsets, okay? And if one industry or one business was spending, really exceeding their cap, they could buy it from somebody who was doing it for a lesser, okay, amount. They're basically trading. So it's work in progress, but it is definitely going on in California. It's also being done at a global level as well. You know, to me, there's issues there with leakage. You know, for example, you can pay somebody in California who's doing something sustainable on that land not to cut it down or deforest it, okay? But did you really solve the issue of wood production? Did you just really push that market somewhere else, okay? So that's the issue with cap and trade, you know, that they really got to work out. And it's also an argument that it gives larger industry the right to pollute rather than reduce, okay? So we have to work on those incentives. But it is working on a global level, and there are solutions I'm confident something will improve on that as well. Government is really important, but they're also a carrot and they're a stick, okay? You know, prior to coffee, I actually worked in engineering and construction, okay? My first job, real job, I should say, when I went there was a natural gas plant in North Africa, you know, and so it's interesting. I also grew up in a very close to nature, so I put on my white hat. I was real excited about being on this job, you know, and then I think we're all born with this little thing that's, you know, when something's not right, okay, you know, and that was, so I was a little discouraged over time, even though I was excited about my job and I was learning. Fortunately, the engineering company I was working for started to get into environmental work. So we actually got to clean up things like Superfund cleanups. We got involved on acid rain projects, okay. So I also got to see that you can use engineering in a positive way, you know, but it also showed me that some of these issues are not insurmountable, okay. You know, we have solved Superfund cleanups. We have solved acid rain. We did solve ozone, okay. Each part of those, government was a part of that, okay. They were a stick. They were also a carrot, you know. And when it came to, for example, sulfur emissions that were really causing most of the environmental problems there with acid rain, they gave them incentives, tax incentives to modernize, you know, and they also gave them a period of time to either correct it or shut it down, okay. So that's where government is a carrot and a stick. So we're, you know, right now carbon is voluntary, okay, and we have to shift it to some regulation within the countries around. What else? Anything on there? good news, it does. The one thing that's good about this, it does unite us all. I think everybody wants to solve carbon pollution. They just don't know how, and we're at the very beginning stages in many ways. Let me talk about, so now I'm going into my industry, back to, all right, I've been inspired from a moral side. Okay, now let me go get the facts. Okay, so I looked at our coffee industry, and it looks like we produced about 169 million 60-kilo bags, so about 10 billion kilos of coffee. Yeah. Coffee is the second largest commodity trade in the world. Oil is first, coffee second. Okay, and it's a huge market. So we generate 24.2 kilos of CO2 per kilo of coffee. So it's not as intensive as some others, but it's intensive. 11 pounds of carbon is produced when you buy a pound of coffee from, and we say from where does it start? When we measure carbon, we measure it from where the grower starts all the way down to you to dispose your bag. So international travel, all the way down to what it takes to brew it with your brewer, okay? That energy that's produced and the carbon that it produced. So best we can tell, it's about 11 pounds of carbon produced, you know. That's close to, if you drove a mile in your average car, that produces about 13 pounds of carbon. Yeah. So a lot of tons of carbon, 122 million tons. But we only represent about 0.5% of the global carbon in the world from a coffee industry point of view. You know, most of it's still coming from industry and the other. Let's see what else we had. So you can see where it breaks down. Most of it is in the cafes. We didn't know that when we first, at Amavida, we started measuring. We first measured what was our carbon from grower to our roasting facility where we roast our coffee. And they said, okay, that's interesting. And then we said, last year we said, I wonder if we could become carbon neutral, okay. And then we said, all right, but if we're gonna do that, we gotta measure everything, you know. So we measured what our carbon was produced in the cafes. What we realized the vast majority is in the intensity in the coffee house, including you guys driving to it, the production, the heat, all the equipment that we heat up, all of this make up the highest portion of our carbon side. You know, transport, roasting's not so bad. But anyway, a little view from our side, how we are starting to arrive in my story here. So I went out, on top of that, I went out and did some case studies. I went out, there were some people that had started working on carbon and coffee, and I wanted to compare notes, okay? Because what were they doing and what are we doing? And do our numbers really match up to verify that 11 or 3 or 6, you know, and not all these companies were the same. Dean's Beans is an old friend of mine. He's an importer and a roaster. Grounds for Change, and we have the zero carbon were the ones that we looked at. They all have different models. So Dean's Beans, he was the first to become carbon neutral coffee. He actually did this way back, I think, a long time ago. And I called him, he asked me, he said, well, now you're just coming around to it? And I'm like, well, I guess I wasn't really listening to you before when you were working on it. And so he goes, yeah, I did this way back 10 years ago. And so he did it. He used a couple groups, Trees for the Future, UPS, World Resource Institute, and Migratory Birds Center. These 3 groups to help him analyze, you know, that whole supply chain of coffee. You know, and he basically concluded that 17 pounds of coffee generates 50 pounds or 3 pounds of carbon per CO2. He's just a roaster, so he's really from there to roaster, okay. And then he said, well, I'm just gonna go do my own thing. That's Dean. So he started planting trees in Peru, and now he does it in Sumatra. So he's pretty much beyond carbon neutral, you know. But from my point of view, one-offs don't always change the bigger problem. You know, it's great that Dean can do that, but is that repeatable so that other people are doing it and that we're really working on the issue a little collectively, you know. But a great reference, great I have great friends in the coffee industry, and we learn from one another. It's really just when I thought my bar was here, Dean raised my bar up here. Okay, so it's a great group to work with. Zero carbon, this guy was really interesting. I talked to him, and he's kind of, his idea is really carbon neutral plus more. He's saying, I'm going to take care of my neighbors too, because they're not taking care of themselves. So he's saying, we got to do more than just me. And his model is similar way. He's really trying, for every bag that he produces, he's trying to remove 10 times the amount of carbon produced. And he's kind of a startup. He has kind of a group that he's working with called Climate Neutral. And they're a new organization coming up that is really trying to set up a program where businesses can come in and register. They'll help measure you, and then they'll give you kind of a certification, okay? What you'll find out is there's not a lot of certifications for carbon neutrality, but it's coming, okay? At some point, it's going to be a purchasing decision on your bag or your product that you're going to be able to tell, like organic or another certification. I know everybody's over-certified, okay? But as individuals, we really don't have a choice, okay, on whether, because we don't know, you know. But it'd be nice, I think you're going to see more seals that say that on products where they are carbon neutral or carbon responsible or so on. So this group is kind of starting that as well. What we also learned in the trying to find somebody to help you determine as a business whether you're carbon neutral, how much carbon you're producing. There's a lot of independent consultants out there that really want to charge you for it, okay? And that part, it's almost a deterrent to really allowing you to move forward, especially some that are very expensive, you know. This group looks at it a little different. They say, okay, maybe you big businesses need to be measured, but if you're a business under this size, you know, you kind of probably produce this amount of carbon, okay, and maybe you can just use that as a reference and you can buy offsets to correct that, you know, which I really think is the model of what we should. A small business down the corner says, man, I want to be carbon neutral. Well, then you're 10 employees and you're this kind of business. Well, you probably produce 40 kilotons, you know, of carbon. Therefore, you can buy offsets over here and claim that you're responsible. And that we have to simplify it in that sense. And that's what this group's doing. So we've been watching. They're kind of new, but I was impressed with what I saw out of them. Grounds for Change, in a similar way, great company. It was interesting. I shot them the questions, and the founder, you know, it's like, I don't know if I want to share that to you. Okay. You know, like, well, Dean did. Okay, I'm trying to share this with everybody else in the coffee industry so we can all start working on this, you know. And but Kelsey warmed up, and when she realized Dean shared it, it was like, okay, that's good. I'll share it too. And because they actually paid a certifier, carbon fund, and they paid quite a bit for it, and they didn't want to share that. And it turned out, but they're similar. They came up with 3 pounds of carbon, you know, for that analysis as well. So it's kind of neat. They're just roasters only, not cafe. Okay. Dean had 3 pounds of carbon, so did they. So I'm validating these figures here through these companies. Okay. Anyway, great companies. You know, I'll talk a little bit about carbon. They paid their offsets. They're paying $10 a pound. I'll talk about Amavida there. I'll compare it. Okay. We're in a similar way. Okay, I actually used an intern from college to help do a lot of this carbon analysis for us. Okay. And Maddie Dom, she goes to Florida International right now. And so we came up, as I mentioned, we're a legal benefit corporation. We came up with 3.6 pounds per carbon, the way we studied it, you know. And but that is also for the cafe operations, we came up with 2.9. So collectively, we're about 8-ish, you know. We're also pretty efficient in terms of because we've already did a lot of upfront work on that, you know. So we're still within the realm of what everybody else is saying. We're actually a little lower. And when we do a couple things. We're in partnership with Cooperative Coffees, which is 24 of us own an import company in the United States and Canada. So every pound that we buy, we donate 3 cents to do what we call carbon projects. It's really agronomy training for growers and so on. So that goes into essentially carbon adaptation projects. The other thing we did is we use because we can't get solar or alternate energy around here as often. We couldn't afford it right away. We're going to look at it in the future. We offset our power through buying energy credits through an organization called Arcadia Power. So if anybody could do this, by the way, a consumer, any business. We buy our power here is coming from Gulf Power. All right. If you look at Gulf Power, about 50% of their energy that they produce, they only produce about 50-something% of their energy. And it's either, some nuke, some natural gas, some mostly petroleum refineries, okay. So the other percentage of energy they have to buy to support us on the grid, they actually have to buy it from somewhere else. So there's a trading process out there where you can buy energy credits, all right. So Amavida, or any individual could do this. You could sign up with Arcadia Power, and you're basically paying the difference between wind and traditional fossil fuel-based energy. And it's not that much, okay? So that's what that is doing, is directing more investment into alternate energy sources. So wind, there's another group called Ethos, which does solar. They're another organization. So you just pick what your choice is. You want to do solar or whatever. So these are things that individuals can do, or certainly companies. So we offset all our costs in all our cafes through those energy credits. And then we purchase carbon offsets through a group called takingroot.org. What we concluded as a company is we have to do 2 things. One is we need to reduce our petroleum consumption, and then we need to build resiliency. Okay, the 2. So back to that thing that we were talking about earlier. We produce carbon, but we also have to invest in carbon credits to actually bring carbon back into the earth. So those are the kind of things that we're counterbalancing both. So we offset our petroleum usage through, obviously, the Arcadia Power, or just by simply making changes in the way we operate as a business, And then Taking Root is the organization. We like Taking Root because they're a longer-term player. Matter of fact, if you look, we paid $20 per ton. That's higher than probably anybody. Most of them are 10. If you looked at the other ones, they were 10. I think there's even people that are buying carbon credits for $3. For us, it was more, we wanted to invest as much as we can in adaptation projects. So, and that also meant we didn't want to just plant trees. We really wanted a longer view, which involves land management, okay, and working with communities to study what lands that are unproductive, that they can actually invest strictly in those, and also making sure that there was some resilience in what they were actually planting there, like woods, for example. Now these communities are there producing wood, and also artisan projects that are giving alternative income. So we like them. They're expensive, but we looked under the hood enough to say that's where we want to invest our money. And I got to tell you, that was the hardest thing for us. Was okay, we know what we're doing, we know what we're using. Now, where do we want to buy carbon credits? And when you start to look underneath them, then you start to look, because most of them are nonprofits, you start to look at their financial reports, okay? And you're like, where's the impact here? Okay, are you really a nonprofit in disguise? You have a lot of consultants that are doing this, and very little impact is occurring. So you have to really look under the hood. So finding good stewards, was a challenge for us, and we found some that these guys were good. As I mentioned, I just talk on certifications. These are the only 3 I came up in the States, We use this one here, Carbon Responsible. And this is it's not a certification, it's a partnership, okay? And this is the way I really think it should be rather than a certification. It's more a partnership that you have trust in. And this is through Taking Root, who, when we sent all our data over, they validated our data, said, okay, you can now be a partner, but this is not a certification, okay? So there's legitimacy behind it, It's more about spreading the word, okay? Carbon Neutral is that company I just spoke about, up and coming. And this is the one they're good. If you're a big company, I think it's probably good for them because they can actually, the investment in the consulting side of the analysis is probably, it's better for larger companies that you typically can afford that. Let's see, just final thoughts here, and I've studied a lot of podcasts, collected a lot of ideas, from people who are way smarter than me, and everybody seems to have a common theme here that, it really begins in the individual, and, because they're really it's going to start there. We all have to, the fact that you guys are in this room, if you become more conscious of it, really thinking, like I said, I heard about it in 2006, said, okay, I didn't really pay attention to it, but it's time, we have to pay attention to it now. It's really here, it's relevant, it's going to affect our kids, it's going to affect a lot of things in the future. We're already feeling it now, even with here locally, we've already experienced it. They have to come from all sectors, though. This is where we're starting to work with collaboration. But we all have a voice, who we vote for, what we advocate for. From the governments who will have to play, certainly the businesses are seeing it. And from my prior slides, you've seen where a lot of this interaction is occurring, but it's still at the beginning stages. The other thing is, you don't have to wait on the regulatory agencies. That's the main thing. And this is the same theme that Dean will tell you, that don't wait to take action. Really start to learn about it, research it on your own. People are going to pick and choose what you want in your life, okay? But you have to start somewhere here, and just know that in kind of earlier I was talking about waiting for a big certification body or somebody to tell you what to do. That's where perfection is the enemy of good. It's okay to use, a broad range. If you're a business owner and you said, I produce about 30 pounds, well, you can participate. Okay, you don't need to wait, because perfection is the enemy of good. If we keep waiting till there's this exact system to tell us to take action, then it's going to be way too late. We have to simplify the system, and really becomes individual judgments and business judgments as well. There's just actions. I know, educate yourself here. On average, you guys, on a per capita basis, we produce 15 tons, At $10, a carbon offset doesn't preclude you from polluting. You got to work on that, but that's $150 a year. That's a lot of money for a lot of people, but it's not excessive if we all recognize how, that it's not that bad either. If you can find a way where you can invest with your conscience, and buy your own offsets as individuals, Businesses, depending on your size, are going to be somewhere less than 100, So you're talking about a mid-sized business. It's at $10 a carbon, that's $1,000 to really work on these things. We find it, from our point of view, from our employees, that it's important to them. It's important for retention of our employees. They feel good about what they're working on. It's it's part of our culture as well. So it's important also to even think of it from that perspective. You're doing something good for your company as well as your employees, and certainly the environment on that side. I grew up like most of you probably. I ate everything, Spam, everything, okay. And thought it was great. I still do. But But I started researching, mostly from a health point of view. And what I'm realizing, I put this note, there's a great film, it's called The Game Changer, okay? And if you haven't seen it, it actually, we have really been molded in through advertising and big business on what we should be consuming. Our food pyramid is totally wrong, guys. It's absolutely wrong. And all you have to do is look at the health problems they're running, whether it's diabetes or whether it's, you can go on, okay? And it's largely due to our pyramid, the way we're eating. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a vegetarian, okay? It means basically, if you look at what a healthy pyramid is, it's eating more plant-based, and less animal proteins, okay? I'm not giving up ice cream, but, but it's still, I've adapted my diet, mostly because I also understand what it does from the carbon side, but it's more important what I realize from personal health, okay? In my prediction is that our food pyramid is going to flip, okay, at some point, because healthcare costs are really through the roof, okay? And it's definitely a huge part of our carbon usage. I think it's about 18%, I think, really comes from livestock. Of all our carbon pollution in the world is coming by, animal, so on, kind of products. So let's see, and the other things are just kind of obvious. We're all getting up. Think about what your consumption is at home. If you can turn off appliances that aren't needed, or electronic thermostats are great. These are things that are really readily available. One thing was really neat that I've observed is the way, particularly in this product that is really transformed. This is a like if you look at the LED light bulb today, right now it's hard to find a non-LED light bulb. All right, and that's a huge impact on consumption. So that's also where we need to change products, okay? But it's an example where government, industry, consumers are all working together and really creating a big thing. We need to do that with other products, that are like that, particularly single-use products. If you're looking in the way to offset, these are some good companies here. I'll leave that up there as well. I'll let you look at that. But any one of these groups right here, you can go find your own, particularly this COTAP. They have all kinds of initiatives all over the world that you can participate in, and they're usually affecting, they're alleviating poverty. They're really working on resiliency issues and adaptation projects as well. And anyway, I'll leave you with a thought. This is, and then I'll open to questions. This is Pauline Kalunga. That's just her. Forests should remain forests, and farmland should have as many trees as possible. She represents a program in Uganda. I mean, she's right there with the frontline growers. That's the way that's their message to us. Okay, and I'll open this up to questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
As a business owner, have you done things for your employee base to try to motivate them to offset? Like, here's an incentive plan if you ride your bike, here's an incentive plan versus like payroll, time off, or anything like that. Find useful.
Carpool is a challenge around here, okay? And it's something that we're tried. We do encourage that, and we allow them time on their work schedules to retrofit it. But to answer your question, yes, it's making it available as part of that. It's certainly encouraging the carpool. We've actually looked at, could we, we have a bunch of folks that work in Panama City and that may go over to Rosemary Beach, and we're like, I wonder if we could put a car over there they could drive back and forth and things like that. We haven't really kicked off that. It's more about communicating that. Yeah, it's a good question. It's problematic here, Our folks in St. Andrews, a lot of them will ride bike. They're doing it just naturally, which is great to see, Yes, sir.
How do you get capitalism to include that moral component that you've obviously decided value, that gives you some value? I guess ultimately that moral decision about offset and so forth is going to affect your bottom line price of how coffee might cost. And so my question, I guess, is how do you do it generally, and how much is it actually affecting your cost of
Sure. No, there's a lot of questions in there, but from a business point of view and a capitalist point of view, there's a lot going on already, and this is, even though you may not hearing, we refer to what we call conscious capitalism, okay? And so there's a lot of initiatives going on. You'll hear a lot through the B Corp framework. B corporations right now, and there's over 3,000 of them, and there's over 50,000 that have taken the assessment globally. Even in the United States, there's a big initiative. You'll see a lot on the West Coast, certainly. Florida is growing quite a bit. Florida has quite a few B Corps in the South Side now. So that is the big shift on the morals thing is going to come from conscious capitalism, okay, that companies that embrace it. There's a lot of private ones that are already doing it. There's just never been a framework for it. So there's more good out there than we know about. So it's gonna happen. Academia, in my opinion, academia plays the biggest part right now. And right now, there's an organization called Florida for Good, okay, that is really a kind of a B Corp hub, and they're connecting universities throughout Florida. UF modeled the first program right now, where their grad students were really working on B Corp frameworks. They're already starting to shift, and there's been other colleges in Florida, but ultimately the goal of Florida for Good is really to be like a center, and so it's changing. I see it because I ride the train with them, okay, but ultimately it's the consumer that's going to drive those decisions, so if you look at the larger multinational controlled by stock exchanges, they're more, because they do have that governance structure, they're either going to do it because they need to out of responsibility, or they won't get a workforce, okay? Because the other workforces, employees are going to go work where they want to work, and particularly today what we observe is people come in the workplace, it's important to who they work for and why, okay? We're seeing more of that, rather than I just don't want to work for a company that does nothing, okay? So their intentions are different. So there's a natural thing occurring, but I don't think you can convince some large companies like that. It's just going to take time, and we have to shift the business model as well, okay? At a government level, City of Portland gives precedence to B corporations, okay? Like you would do a minority-owned, a women-owned, or so on. And New York City does as well. So we're starting to see that the carrot's coming in. Does that make sense? And from the idea of what it costs us for the cup, there's a different view. It goes back that even the creed of the B Corps is not being the best; it's about being the best for. And if you do that, they will honor you. Okay, and that's the difference. That's why Patagonia is so good at what they do, because they do it without compromise, and then their customers honor them for it, and you have an incredible amount of repeat business. What we see in our world, if you look at it from a competitive point of view, we're not Starbucks and they're not us. Okay, and we don't worry about what they're doing. We worry about what we're doing. Okay. Less about them, and under that same creed. And if we do what we do, we stick to our values, our customers will honor us because they know what we're doing and they know why. And we produce a good product, okay? I don't know if that answered your question, but maybe gave some insight to it, Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but I got a couple of comments.
Okay.
One is when you make a decision, like one decision is good for you, like stopping the red bean or whatever it would be, it multiplies because then you're doing good in these other things too. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about when our culture is going to turn from, oh, this is going to cost 2 cents extra for doing this, to, oh my God, this is something else we can do that. We've got any ideas about that?
I think people have to have a reason to do it, okay? And that's part of and usually they will, okay? And it's a large shift. Does that make sense? They will. It's mostly due to you have to be educated on the why first, That's what I think is probably holding us back, whether it's diet, healthcare, and recognizing that what we eat has a lot to do with how it affects our health care. Interesting thing in some of the things, do you realize that most doctors have almost very little nutritional training, okay, in their whole career? Okay. Their focus is on dealing with you after the fact, some prevention through blood work and so on, but they have almost no classes on nutrition, okay. And if you think about that for a second, if we were really working on nutrition, knowing that really is the largest prevention of what we can do with our health care, that is a big shift we got to make as a country as well. Anyway, that helps. But education is a big piece of it. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
As a business that acknowledges you're trying to be carbon neutral and that's an issue, and you seem to agree the biggest problem with getting people to do it is educating them on the benefits of it.
Yeah.
As a company, do you do anything to educate your consumers on the benefit of your product over other people and what they could do?
It's a good question. I mean, our employees, we do. Okay, they understand what it is, because they're really the message. Okay, they are the face of our company. So, getting our employees involved to understand what we're doing is part of that. The branding side of how you communicate is a trick. It's like, how do you call something green without calling it green? Okay, so it's a lot of constant messaging, a little bit here, a little bit there, and reinforcing as you do it, or speaking and engagements like that. Okay, certainly finding ways to communicate, social channels, a lot of different ways. They all collectively is what helps, and ideally, the best way is really us sharing what we know with somebody else, and hoping that they'll come on board. That makes sense. We're a lot stronger in numbers than we are as individuals. So we'd rather see a lot of businesses in Panama City do this. A lot of businesses around understanding what it is, and then we have a community of businesses that know what's going on, and they'll support each other too. That's the other thing that's really good, is they'll support you. A lot of the people that we sell to and buy to, we have a very common view of what we're trying to do. So we have a community of businesses that are like-minded that support. So we have to have more of them. Yeah. Sure. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Just curious, internally, who actually tracks your emissions? I know you have an outside agency that does that. I just meant
We have a carbon.
how are you looking at all those things, logistics,
Yep.
and how do you determine what difference, what changes you're going to make with it, and how you do business?
Yeah, it's actually a good thing. We track it on the carbon side. We track it. We usually have an intern that works with us too, or we'll do it ourselves. Now, the first one was really hard. Well, not really hard, but it took time. But now that we have an understanding and the framework for it, it's not so bad. Okay. But the decisions that we drive toward is our B Corp. We're actually audited every year by the B Corp on there. We actually do an annual plan that says what we are going to work on every year. Because as a business owner, there's a lot of things that keep me up awake at night. Okay, and it's an emotional thing. When you're trying to balance employee needs, you want to do things better for employees, you want to do things better for environment or community, okay, then you can't do it all because you can't afford it oftentimes, and that's the challenge. So it's an emotional thing. You just kind of figure out what you can do every year. It's not about getting it all at once. It's about doing incremental improvement as you can. And then more importantly, learning. There's areas that we've been a B Corp for over 5 years, and they had carbon, cradle to grave and measurements and all that. We're like, well, we're not doing that 5 years ago. We just can't go there. But as we made incremental improvements over that period, we're like, okay, now we did do everything. What's next? So you integrate it little by little over time, and then knowing that some of them you never reach the end goal. It's never done. But it's a compass, though. Does that make sense? B Corp is an incredible, powerful framework, that gives you a framework, and a compass of what things you could do to be a better company, even though you can't get them all. So, yeah. Yes.
With the certification process, kind of you just getting started with the B Corp, to be net zero, is there going to be a tax incentive or anything that is what you guys are working towards? Is the reason? It seems like
Yeah.
it's going to cost a lot of money to keep track of your carbon, and you're paying money to third world countries.
Yeah.
That's just money out of your company's potential
Mm-hmm.
profit. Is that for eventually hoping that there's going to be a tax benefit or some sort of write-off? I mean, it seems like there would have to be.
It could be. I mean, most people don't go in the B corporation approach because they're necessarily looking for the tax write-off. You're doing it because that's the way you want to run your business. Okay, and you feel, and it's that idea that if you do it that way, you're. I would argue that you'd be healthier if you do take these practices in long term. If you look at a company from a long-term point of view, those companies have a good history of survival, because of their practices. Okay, they have better employee retention. There's a lot of things they do. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah.
It just sounds like for a startup company, it'd be hard to
It's actually not as hard. The carbon side is not as hard as you think. Depends on the company. I'm not going to say that's universal. It's more about I don't know how to do it, and none of my systems support it. And then you have to understand it. And taking Root, for example, gave us a calculator that we could use. So they gave us a criteria to plug into, and then it was going in and pulling the data together for that. But it took a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. It is a commitment, to it. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yes. Yeah.
I was just going to say, for those of you that may have any additional questions for Dan, if you are going to stick around at all, maybe
Sure.
they could pose
Yeah.
those questions to you. And might I kind of borrow your mic?
Yes.
Oh wait, here's one over here.
Okay.
This one's working. It is. So I just wanted to close out for our Citizen Science Talk, our first one of the new year. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and hearing about Dan and Amavida's journey toward carbon neutrality. We will be having another Citizen Science, same time, 12:30, same place, ATC 303, on February the 25th. I will announce that presentation in just about a week or so. And I also wanted to remind you guys that Keith Hagan of St. Andrew Bay RMA, Baywatch, is also here. So if you have any questions about their organization and about their upcoming golf tournament, please, he's right here if you had any of those questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.